Hey everyone, you are listening to the Self-Awareness Journey podcast. This little banter is about a car ride long and features your hosts, JJ Parker and Melissa Albers. JJ owns a tech company and Melissa has been a coach working with influencers for the last 18 years.
Well, Melissa, last week I had my Vistage meeting and I've talked about it before, but that is like my CEO roundtable group
Right.
that we get together with every month.
Mm-hmm.
And, we generally talk about business issues. And most of the time we have a speaker that comes in and talks about different topics, right?
Yeah.
Lots of times those topics are just like how to run your business, HR stuff, like operational stuff, marketing stuff.
Yep.
Well, last week we had a speaker come in and she talked about unconscious bias.
Okay.
So heading into that meeting and getting ready to listen about that topic, I wasn't really sure what that was going to entail. When you think about unconscious bias, like what comes to mind?
Yeah.
Like what are your first instincts about that topic?
Right. I actually was like, unconscious bias. Like, so then I'm starting to figure out what does that mean? Like, okay, bias. I understand what it means to be biased about something, some topic of any variety.
Yeah.
Unconscious bias. Okay, so presumably I have these opinions, but I don't know that I have these opinions necessarily.
Right. Yeah. Interesting, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not something you're thinking about somehow.
No.
Right? Like we like to think that we are always thinking, like we're always somehow in control of our thoughts, but we're not.
No.
Well,
99% of the time we're not.
yeah. In any case, so I was like, okay, that's an interesting topic, unconscious bias. Like, let's learn about that.
Yeah.
Well, this speaker, just for just a contextual demographic of our little group. I mean, it's generally middle-aged. I mean, frankly, it's middle-aged white people. I mean, I don't know. I'm not gonna put any more padding around that because it's what it is.
Yeah.
And she started off with saying, "Hey, we're gonna talk about stuff that's gonna make you really uncomfortable." And
that's an interesting way to start any group meeting.
Any group, yeah, right? Like I've never met any of you. You're all at the top of your game here, business wise, and I'm going to make you all extremely uncomfortable. So she started in on this topic of unconscious bias, and her initial point was, you are all biased. You all have bias, right? And it's across the board in all sorts of different ways. It's racial. It's It's
social and economic. Political.
Male, female biases,
birth order,
like all
money.
sorts of things.
Yeah.
And the idea that like everyone is biased, like your human brain is actually built and has been evolved to have bias.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
So it's not like a thing you're choosing. It's like you have it. It's wired in.
Yeah.
And it's part of human survival over the past like millions of years. So so you have it. Just so admit you have it, right?
Yeah.
So that was our first challenge.
You're not telling our listeners to have it. You're just saying you already
have
do.
It. You already have
you
it.
already
Right?
do. Yeah.
So she wanted us to all admit, like, yep, okay, we are all biased in some way, which I agree with. I didn't have a problem with accepting that. Some of the other people were like, "Oh no, I'm not really biased," because
really,
sometimes
did you have some people say that?
Yeah, they're trying to get their head around that, like the idea that they don't, when making hiring decisions, they're not doing it in a biased way.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay.
Which, of course, none of us are going to sit down like, oh, yeah, we, discriminate on hiring or something. Like, that's not
of course.
and especially in business, and when you have a leadership role, I mean, you have to be very, very careful and sensitive to that. And
totally.
And so So people were kind of like, I'm not biased. Like, we have these hiring practices, and
We have
treat people
practices to cover it up.
And right. And her point was like, okay, fine, but yes, you still are, right? So just getting a little pushback on that, which I thought was interesting. But I like her initial positioning, like, because you have a human brain, you are biased. Accept it. Now let's figure out what we're gonna do about that.
And she wasn't coming at it like I heard about this meeting through 2 other sources in addition to you, so it was a thing. It was a thing.
Melissa and I like run tight enough circles that the drama made it around.
Quickly, like 6 minutes after the event. I would say though too that I think in the context of this conversation, it's very important to say that she was not making a judgment against people at all. Like, it was the exact opposite. It wasn't meant to cause a ruckus. It wasn't meant to be judgmental or make people feel bad. It was simply to increase awareness.
Exactly.
And that's a huge distinction, I think, that needs to be said right here, because I think there's a lot of conversations going around the horn these days about your biases and diversity and inclusion, and lots and lots of really strong opinions going on about that, laced with a lot of judgment. Yeah. So in this case, though, she was really, truly trying to educate, not judge.
She was, and I felt she did a really good job at that. Yeah. So we got into an exercise that kind of proved her point. And I know you've used this a couple times. So you want to walk through this exercise?
Yes, I think it's so helpful.
Because I thought this was so powerful.
Yeah. And for our listeners, honestly, this is going to be 30 seconds. And if you're not driving or walking, it would be awesome if you could close your eyes so you could really do a quick visualization with us. So the visualization is close your eyes and imagine that you have been invited to attend a really high-level tech conference in Florida. And it's February in Minneapolis. The weather's cold and awful, and you're so excited to go. You pack your bags, you go to the airport, you get on the airplane. You got lucky and you got upgraded. The pilot steps out and says, "You guys are all so lucky you're going to Florida." Pilot's standing there fully decorated and smiling and offers everybody a great trip, disappears into the cockpit. Away we go. You get to Florida. It is beautiful out. You get to your hotel, unpack, and there's enough time for dinner. So you go down to an open air restaurant that's out on a deck. It's pretty crowded with people, and everyone is really enjoying the atmosphere. It's just a beautiful ambiance. And there's a couple right next to you, and the couple's laughing and enjoying the interaction. And you sort of are leaning into that interaction because they're having such a good time laughing and talking about their children. And after a lovely meal, you go to bed. And the next morning, you go to the conference, and you have front row seats to this conference. And the CEO comes out and talks about this super cool new technology, and you feel so lucky to have been a part of that conference. So that's the visualization. Now, I just want to ask a couple of questions. And the questions are this. Was the pilot a white male? What did your pilot look like? When you went to dinner, the couple that was sitting next to you, were they biracial? Were they same sex? When you went to the conference, what did the CEO look like? Was the CEO a white male? Or what did that CEO look like? And so that's the visualization. And when I did it, I admit I was the pilot was 50-something white male. The couple was a standard, I'm using air quotes because there's no such thing, white couple talking about a male and a female talking about their children. And I pictured the stereotypical, like Mark Zuckerberg style of CEO in the tech conference. And her point to that visualization was to just recognize those pictures that you put in your mind. show
Yep.
you what some of your biases were. What was your experience when you did that?
Well, obviously it was very similar, and her point was, what you would visualize through that exercise are going to be people like you.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, and she said that's normal. Like, normally when people come up with these images, they just imagine people just like them.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, right. Yeah. There was a middle-aged white pilot and a young male female couple and male CEO. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that shouldn't have been
Mm-hmm.
a whole variety of different people. Those are like all of the just same me people. Like, I'm just seeing me over and over.
Right. Or the images that my family has shown me since the time I was young, that this is what quote normal is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So seeing me through that story isn't very exciting.
No,
I don't want to see more of me.
when
But it's interesting, right?
Yeah.
The idea that your brain is wired in that way. So it's like, again, it's not a judgment thing.
Yeah.
We're just kind of bringing to light, like, hey, it's kind of like an is thing.
Yep.
Now, what are we going to do about it? How does that change the way, knowing that, having that awareness now, how does that maybe change the way we want to see the world?
So I have a question. In that event, when you had that visualization, so you just explained what your reaction to it was. What was the room's response as a global response?
Well, it was about the same. Everyone seemed to have the same experience.
And and then what did they feel about the fact that they had that experience? Did people share that? Like, oh, that's
guilty.
Interesting. Oh, they felt guilty.
I mean, they felt kind of guilty, like a little ashamed, like, ooh, yeah, now that you went through that exercise, I kind of like, or at least they felt, I think what we shared was, we felt a little bit like, oh boy, there it is, right? Mm-hmm. There she just proved beyond doubt that I have a bias.
Yeah.
Right? Because when she said, like, hey, you all have bias, some people were pushing back on it. Mm-hmm. We did the exercise and everyone's like, ooh, yeah, I guess she's right. And then personally, I felt like a little guilty. Because I'm like, why did I by default see the world in that way? And I wasn't really very proud of that, Mm-hmm. And even for our family, I mean, I'm white, we have non-white children, right? And so it's like, I was like, well, that's really unfair of me to have that bias when my own family doesn't fit this mold.
Yeah.
Which I think really illustrates how powerful some of those deep biases are that form in childhood and are deeply ingrained.
Yeah. So when I did that exercise, and I think right now I'm trying to be way more open than even normal. Like, I'm really trying to learn. I feel like I'm in this process of wanting to be open and learn. And I realize there's a whole bunch of stuff. I hear dog toenails.
Yeah. Sorry, listeners. My doggies are joining in the conversation here.
And maybe if we're lucky enough to also have a video today, we can see the tail. But what's interesting for me is, like, even though I feel really open and I want to learn, I really, really want to learn. When I did that, I was like, oh, wow. And I too have many non-white family members. I mean, my mother's Chinese as an example. And just to feel that unaware, like I didn't realize that. So I was really kind of open and interested. Like, I didn't feel guilty. I felt like, wow, this is yet another example of what I didn't know that I thought I did. Right.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you, so like, that's our individual approach to this topic. But I know that in that meeting, and there's, again, this is not a judgment at all, but in that meeting, people got upset. People started to get mad.
So she, we started talking about this idea that, is it good, or do you want for your company to hire all of the same kind of people that are just like you? Right? That was kind of the core of her like thesis here was like,
got it. Okay.
You're all business owners. You want high performing organizations. Do you want to hire a bunch of people that are exactly like you and they think like you? Because unless you start becoming more aware of this unconscious bias, by default, you're just going to hire more people that are just like you. Not like really on purpose, but it's just going to happen just like the visualization exercise we just did, but it's going to happen in real life. Right? And so she started talking about this idea like, hey, so generally our, like, I'm going to be fairly stereotypical here.
Yeah.
And it's not everybody's story, but generally I would say in this, business owner, CEO cohort, a lot of the people in those positions had a head start, right? They happen to be the right race and of the economic background from their families. They happen to have been born in the right place. They, there was so much circumstance that happened for that group of people that the analogy is like, if the goal is to climb Mount Everest, like they started halfway up. Like they didn't have to start down in the town and collect supplies,
right?
And make it through all the foothills and they got like helicoptered halfway in. Yeah. Right. I've used this other analogy where it's like they started on third base. Right.
Yeah.
Whereas some people don't even have a bat.
Yep.
So and what we're trying to get to here is, hey, do you want an employee that was actually just like parachuted into like halfway up the mountain and then just climbs the last half? Or do you want the one that started at the edge of town, made their way, collected their supplies, made it all the way up that other first half of the mountain, and then brings you to the peak, or goes with you to the peak, right? And she was saying you want the one that worked hard to get there, right? They want it more. They have proven that they're able to do it. Like they have the grit to actually make it through that trip. The one that gets helicoptered in likely doesn't, right? And that right there,
that's when everything went sideways.
Really derailed this whole conversation.
Yeah. I think right now we're in this really strange place where all of a sudden, well, it's always been, but all of a sudden there is a real focus for everybody to straighten up and learn. And I think that the focus comes, and it's coming in so hard and in so many different directions that it leaves a lot of people feeling angry. Because it's almost like, well, I'm doing the best I can too. And even if I had this and didn't have that, so there's like almost a little defensiveness and protectiveness because of the amount of information and the amount of expectation and the amount of judgment that is laced within this topic. Not saying all people are all of those things, but I think there's so much energy around it right now that it's leaving people feeling like they have to justify every decision and choice that they're making.
Yeah.
And the sad part is that, like, even in this example, it's not meant to do that. That's not the point of that. And I feel sad when it creates a huge ruckus and people get really angry about it, because then we're losing this really, really good opportunity where everybody's talking about it.
Yeah. I agree. Like, I agree that it's a good opportunity. What I thought was particularly interesting after this talk went sideways, and we had to work a little bit to get it back on the rails. What I thought was interesting is, like, some people were just like, like it just definitely, it threw everyone off kilter, right?
Yes.
Everyone was just like not centered and
Mm-hmm.
and having just their own individual reaction over this. And the guy who coordinates the group and who selected this speaker
Mm-hmm.
was super concerned. He's like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe this went so bad. I feel really, really bad about maybe like even bringing this kind of topic to our group." And I was like, absolutely, like, this is like the best thing you could have done. The fact that you knocked everyone off center, and I guarantee they are all gonna go home tonight and they're gonna like either talk about it. They're just gonna talk about it. They're either they're gonna like complain about it, or they're gonna like I did. I was just like, we had the most amazing time. But it's gonna start the conversation, which I thought was the most beautiful part about it. Like, let's at least start the conversation.
Right.
And she did a great job of that.
Right. And I was thinking, I being a Vistage speaker for a number of years, like a dozen years, like that's a pressure cooker to go into those environments and speak to any CEO roundtables, right? And I was a member in that same group for 3 or 4 years or whatever it was. And I give her so much credit because that's what she does all the time.
Every day she makes like middle-aged white guys super uncomfortable. I love it.
I just am so proud
of
her.
Ones with big egos.
Yeah, I know. And I've never even met her, or actually don't even know her name, but I just have so much pride for the fact that she's willing to go first. She's willing to take this on energetically, because there is so much energy here. And I don't know, I think that this is a hard topic, and everybody's opinions are sort of floating around, or they're very deep-seated, but no one wants to say what they are. Now everybody's afraid to even have an opinion, it's like, or say absolutely the wrong thing. Cancel, there's a cancel culture out there right now where if you say the wrong thing, it's over, which doesn't give any room whatsoever for growth and learning and flexibility.
Yeah, I agree. Like with, if you ramp up the pressure in that way, it doesn't actually give people room to grow. Right. It just, we actually also talked about this idea around growth like that, which I think is super interesting. I don't want to take us off on too big of a tangent, but we were talking about how like if you're part of a maybe like minority group, right? A group that's not part of the mainstream, the majority, right?
Yeah.
And there's bias against you, right? Like there's stereotypes about your group, right?
Yep.
That when you cross that threshold into mainstream, like as an advocate for your group, that you have no opportunity to fail. So who was that I kind of like mess up the story a little bit, but who was the first black baseball player?
Babe Ruth. I don't know.
Was that no?
No, I'm
Tony
not
Robinson not Tony Robinson.
Okay,
oh my gosh, we're such big sports fans, right? Well, the analogy that I'm completely killing right now is that the idea that hey, like African Americans were not allowed to play baseball, and the first person who got to go play baseball, the pressure to be perfect was really high. And if he wasn't perfect, then everyone would be like, oh, see, that's how, whatever, that's how they act, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so think about it from both sides. Like one side's unaccepting, the other's got such insane pressure to be perfect.
Yeah.
Right? When you're sort of crossing these boundaries.
Yeah, he was interviewed recently, and he said that he was talking about that exact thing and saying how after every game or during the games, he felt this huge pressure to, he had to perform a certain way. And if he had a bad play on the field, people would throw things. Like,
Yeah.
it was just terrible. Are you looking up his name?
It's Jackie Robinson.
Oh,
I knew it was
thank you.
Robinson. I just like, so bad.
Oh, no disrespect to Jackie Robinson fans.
know.
It's just it's us and our inability to follow sports.
I'll get it together someday here on this podcast. Don't worry. But I think that's really interesting because the thing that's interesting about some of that stuff to me, and we should just do a whole separate podcast on that, is this idea, this pressure to be perfect when you're crossing boundaries, like new jobs, socioeconomic, like all sorts of boundaries. There's tons of boundaries. I think that's a really interesting topic. But, back on unconscious bias, here is one really deep thought. Deep thoughts by JJ. Here's one deep thought. The most impactful thing, I think, or like the most close to home thing that came to me during this whole event was this idea that, okay, given my upbringing, I have unconscious bias. Okay, if I'm gonna accept that, right? I have kids that don't look like me. Could I have unconscious bias that I am actually treating my kids different? And I that one just, I was like, oh my goodness, like, could that be happening? I don't want that to be happening. But if I accept the idea that I do have unconscious bias and I'm living in a mixed race environment, could I be applying that bias without knowing it?
That's very interesting.
So there was my deep thought.
That's a very deep
I don't
thought.
have an answer for you.
That's
but
all right.
It was one thing that was just like, oh boy, that's something I really want to sit with and think about.
Well, you know what I like about that?
For a long time.
What I really like about that, JJ, is that it's honest. And it's a question without an answer. And I have experienced so many of my coaching conversations in the last few weeks regarding this topic where people are feeling so much pressure as leaders to have all the answers. And they don't have the answers. We don't have the answers. And I think that it's much more healthy and easier to say authentically, these are the questions. I don't know the answers. Let's explore them, but I don't know the answers. Makes it much more approachable and much more open for dialogue and for learning.
Yeah. Well, to wrap this one up, I hope everybody thinks about this topic, maybe talks about it.
Yeah.
You know, with their spouse, with their friends, even with their coworkers, because we want, I want, maybe that's not a we, but I want a society where we have a variety of opinions and worldviews and experiences in the room, because it makes my organization better and it makes my life experience better.
Right. Right.
So, and just opening the conversation, like you said, to not be so judgmental about it and be more honest about it. Or even just
closed, or even try not to be as closed, because it's a self-awareness piece, right? Just check in if you're feeling afraid or like you feel like over responsibility or obligated to position a certain way and you're unsure. It's totally normal to feel like that, and it's also totally normal to not have the answers and to just say that.
Yeah, and when you do have this conversation, which I hope you do, really feel how some of these words cause a big reaction in your body, because I could tell in me it was pretty triggered the entire time, and even talking here, you can feel yourself kind of go through some reaction.
Right. Yeah. We hope that you've enjoyed today's episode. Our mission is to help people become happier and more effective by gaining insight into their own thoughts and feelings. We'd love your support. First, share this podcast with anyone you think might enjoy it. Second, leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast site. This helps others discover the podcast so we can reach more people. And third, sign up for our newsletter at theselfawarenessjourney.com. This will help us communicate better with you and build our community. Thank you so much for joining us in the Self-Awareness Journey. We'll see you next week.